He was someone that saw a lot of what you and I, Tracie, were talking about
Mm.
the potential and greatness of Tampa. But he brought billions with him. And, phase one of Water Street was, north of $3.5 billion of investment, wildly successful. They're already talking about phase two. They're already moving forward with phase two. But thinking about that office building at 1001 and bringing in a major accounting firm to really be that anchor and to be a part of that, to help not only our clients see that vision, but to have this like really great connection of talent, a lot of young talent that would just bring a lot of energy to Water Street.
Welcome to The Bay Builds, the podcast spotlighting the founders and executives behind Tampa Bay's biggest brands. I'm your host, Tracie Domino. The last time Mike Griffin and I were recognized in the same room was at the Tampa Bay Business Journal's 30 Under 30 Awards, and that was roughly 20 years ago. A lot has changed since then. We were also in the inaugural cohort of Emerge Tampa, a program created to keep young Tampa talent from moving to other cities like Atlanta and Charlotte, and Mike was one of the co-chairs of that first group. Mike didn't just stay, he became the standard for what staying and building actually looks like. Mike became the youngest chairman in the 135-year history of the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce, was appointed to the Tampa Port Authority by the governor, was recognized as one of the top 25 most influential business leaders in Tampa, and one of Florida's 50 world changers. Mike was the first Emerge Tampa graduate to chair the chamber itself, and through all of it, he never stopped investing in USF, the university where it all began. While he was there, he served 2 terms as student body president. Today, he serves as vice chair of the USF Board of Trustees and chair of the Finance Committee, and has been a central figure and architect in the new on-campus football stadium. Professionally, Mike is vice chairman and co-head of the Florida Region at Savills, and is responsible for more than 13 million square feet of real estate transactions across 18 states and 15 countries, including the first Fortune 500 relocation in Tampa's history and the first lease on Water Street. His first job was selling Coke and peanuts in the stands of Tampa Stadium, and he's been building in the city ever since. Welcome, Mike. So great to have you here. I'm going to start somewhere a little bit personal because we share a little bit of history. So we were in the same Tampa Bay Business Journal 30 Under 30 class and that same first Emerge Tampa cohort. We both chose to stay in Tampa and build here when we could have gone somewhere easier. Looking back, what made you bet on Tampa when the city wasn't yet really an obvious choice?
Well, Tracie, it's great to be here. Great to see you. I think we were the youngest in that 30 under 30. And I really actually believe that. It is sometimes great to look back, to really appreciate what you have. And as you're looking forward around kind of the new chapters and new challenges, to really celebrate and reflect. And I think that I love that question because it's something I've been thinking about recently. For me, like you, product of the Hillsborough County school system here. Really, I think very fortunate to have gone through that. And, it ultimately got me thinking about, really what makes Tampa tick at a very young age, like really what makes this community special. And so when it was time to decide where I was going to go to college, there was the usual, spots, Florida State. Didn't really know much about USF. And it just so happened that my prom date in my senior year, who's a wonderful person. Her father was the chair of the marketing department at USF, Dr. Bill Locander. And he said, you really need to come learn about what's going on at USF. You talk about your passion for Tampa, you should really think about staying here. And so I did that. I didn't even know USF had dorms. I'd been on campus once or twice for a basketball game growing up. But when I really got into the inside of that campus, it really was this incredible light bulb that went off that, really drew me to that university. One, because I saw the potential of USF, but it allowed me to also further see the potential of Tampa. And so ultimately it created this, the inflection point for me in my life to say, not that where you decide to go to college is the biggest decision of one's life. It is certainly a key one, but for me, it was. For me, it was that moment where I was doubling down, investing on this community before a lot of folks really believed in it, acknowledging that we had a great story to tell. And I just wanted to be a part of it. And I didn't want to wait till after graduation, going away and coming back. I wanted to be here so I could start getting involved in Tampa, in the region while I was at school. That's not a normal thing for an 18-year-old to be thinking about, but I just knew that this is where I wanted to be. And I just could feel that Tampa was going to be great. It was good, but really become great. And I think, over the past, 20 plus years, to have a front row seat to that growth has really been just phenomenal. And to play a small role with helping to build that has been my life's work.
Small role. That's funny. Your first job was selling Coca-Cola and peanuts in the stands of the original Tampa Stadium in junior high, and then working in Publix in high school. That's not the typical origin story of someone who ends up shaping the city's skyline. What did those early jobs teach you that still shows up in how you operate today?
I love that question. So I went to Webb junior high. So I grew up in Northwest Hillsborough County, never moved. But I went to Baycrest, Just, Blake, Webb, Jefferson, and Sickles. So never moved, but back then there was like a school for every grade. So I played junior high football at Webb. We actually played in the last junior high football championship. We lost 6-0. I'm still bitter about it. We lost to Dowdell, but my head coach, Coach Marvin Bell, said, hey, to all of us, there's an opportunity to work at Tampa Stadium. And I love football, love sports. I wasn't afforded opportunities to see the Bucs play. We couldn't afford to go growing up. And so I was like, if I could see a little bit of football and, whatever, work. And I remember the first time I worked the stadium, it was, they have you come in and it's, you're filling Cokes. There's no bottles. Like you were filling fountain drinks and, a satchel of peanuts. And they're like, just go. And I remember my first game, it was the Packers and Bucks. And if you remember those games back then, thankfully I wasn't selling beer. I was selling the compromised beer, but everyone was drinking. And so here I am in junior high around a lot of intoxicated people, but it was hot. It was, not a lot of pay, but it was literally walking up and down stairs. And it just ultimately, it allowed me to understand, and appreciate hard work, working with, my teammates, but just putting myself out there and just not, just seeking an allowance, but starting to earn some responsibility. So the sweat, I eventually, had a side hustle where I sold tap water and made extra money for that. And then, look, Publix, working at 2 Publix stores, they taught me a lot about, how to treat people, how to really have a standard of excellence in everything you do. The cleanest, space in a Publix was the mop room, because every night I would help clean the store, but we would clean that room every night. So it taught me that attention to detail mattered, customer service mattered, and that, building a team around you that believes in those philosophies are really, really important. Now, was I thinking that when I was in, high school? Absolutely not. I was just trying to make money, but the skills that I made in both of those, I carry a lot with me today.
Just sounds so great. And I just remember, that was my Publix, right?
Yep.
And just it's just such a fun thing for me to think back to that time and all the people we knew who worked there and how much time has passed and how successful so many of those people are with those different principles that they taught there. So just changing gears a little bit, your mentor, Ann Duncan, hired you as her first employee at Vertical Integration straight out of USF. What did she see in you, and what did that relationship teach you about what it means to invest in somebody before they've proven it?
I'm very open about this around kind of what are some of the keys to success. And for me, it's honestly being around a lot of strong women. So, starting with my mother, my grandmothers, being around President Judy Genshaft at USF, but also Ann Duncan. So Ann and I met at USF. I was on the first board of trustees when Governor Bush reorganized higher education. So she was also on that first board. And I was very focused on going to law school. I just felt like that's what I needed to do. My brother went to law school, and I just assumed that's the next step. And, Anne, to her credit, said, you really should learn more about, commercial real estate and what that means and what that does. And to myself, I was like, look, if this doesn't work out, we launched this new business, under her leadership and her vision, incubated out of an established company that she was at. I was like, look, what's the worst that could happen? We fail and I go to law school a year or two later. Grateful for the last, 22, 23 years of working in an industry with her. So, we sold the company about 11 years ago to Savills. We're a, large global commercial real estate company, and her and I still work together. She's our chief operating officer now. We're doing different things, from a leadership perspective in the company, but that's not normal. I've never had a resume. For me, it's around kind of creating your own opportunities. But she saw me investing a lot in myself, but more importantly, taking risks for me before she took a risk on me. And so I think that, being with someone that saw something, honestly in me and gave me an opportunity, is something that I've tried to continue. But for her to see that, here's an industry I knew nothing about. I had a business degree from USF, but literally could not have told you what commercial real estate really was. But to be with her, to partner with her, changed my life and has changed lives of a lot of other people. I mean, it started with two of us. We now have 50 people in the office here in Tampa. Many of those are OGs, with us from the original vertical integration days. And to see their lives changed, whether it's through compensation, leadership development, professional development, that's an incredible, just gets me excited that, you're actually really able to change lives within the folks that you see every day that then turn into greater opportunities for others in the community.
So with that, the tenant representation is a relationship business that you do. That's what it is at its core. So you're not really selling as much a product, you're selling trust and access. So how do you think about building and maintaining relationships at the level you operate at? And what do most people in this business get wrong about that?
Building trust is the fundamental, kind of approach that I have. And, that sometimes takes years. Sometimes that takes, multiple setbacks. I don't feel like I sell anything. I think that I and I try to preach and teach, focus around, the consultative side of our industry versus like the deal or the speed in which a new client is brought in. And we're working with companies that are, large, multinational, publicly traded. We're working with all levels of government, but we're also working with startups. And a lot of these companies of all shapes and sizes, their number one expense is their people. Their number two expense a lot of times is their real estate. And so we're helping them make really, really big decisions that impacts not only their bottom line, but impacts their ability to grow and to thrive. And so for me, it's how do you really connect with them to provide them the solutions that they need. And so, again, one, it's establishing trust, and you establish trust by being genuine, always being in sales mode. The number of times that I've helped clients or prospects to clients help solve solutions that had nothing to do with real estate, and then turns into an opportunity that's more in our wheelhouse, 2 or 3 years later, happens all the time. And so for us, it's just, trying to, and again, kind of the, teaching our team and folks, especially younger folks in our industry, that it's not all about, the deal. It's about being helpful, being a good listener, but really, helping folks make what a lot of times is a decision that either they're not experienced with, could really impact them adversely, as their company continues to grow. So it's a great part of what we do, but for me, it's less about real estate. It's more about, really engaging with people on a meaningful level.
Well, it's clearly worked because you brokered the first Fortune 500 relocation in Tampa's history and the first lease in Water Street. And those aren't just transactions or moments that change the physical and economic shape of the city. What does it feel like to be on the right side of history in deals like that?
So both of those were really, really important to the city because, with Water Street, you kind of take a few steps back and you look at what Jeff Innick has done for this community. And I don't think we can ever thank him enough for taking a risk on us. He was someone that saw a lot of what you and I, Tracie, were talking about the potential and greatness of Tampa. But he brought billions with him. And, phase one of Water Street was, north of $3.5 billion of investment. wildly successful. They're already talking about phase two. They're already moving forward with phase two. But thinking about that office building 1001 and bringing in a major accounting firm to really be that anchor and to be a part of that, to help not only our clients see that vision, but to have this like really great connection of talent, a lot of young talent that would just bring a lot of energy to Water Street. But a lot of this started, so you had Jeff with his investment, but then that next anchor was USF. And so, Mr. Vinnick, gifted USF land, which eventually became their USF's new medical school. And so talk about a wildly successful public-private partnership that brought doctors, researchers, students, all walks of life into that ecosystem. And so, these other large, private companies aren't coming there if there isn't that that true anchor. And USF and Mr. Vinnick were those anchors. And so it's another example. I know we're talking about other big projects here with the Rays and some others. This community is really good at doing big things when we believe in ourselves. And that's a great example of that. And so for me, just to be able to tell the story of Tampa to folks that are looking at markets all over the country, I position us against Austin, Charlotte, Dallas, and many others on a weekly basis. But when you look at the connections that we have with USF and our higher education institutes that say, hey, we can fuel your growth, we can fuel your talent needs indefinitely, that doesn't happen in other markets. And I think, again, it's just really gravitating around what makes Tampa special. And it's no longer a secret, and which is why a lot of these companies are making big bets here.
It's really just so interesting thinking back to the Emerge days, and that was kind of the whole point, right, of why that whole organization was started, was to have that young talent, and just to see that come to fruition. And now you see it in everyday life is really kind of amazing. So you've completed deals in 18 states and 15 countries, and of course Tampa's your home base, but your reach is genuinely global. How do you use that global perspective to give your Tampa clients an edge in a purely local competitor can't match?
Yeah, no, it's, we live in a global economy. Florida, I think we're the 13th largest economy in the world now, and growing. When you look at the amount of wealth that has moved here, I think we're at plus 21 billion in wealth that's moved here. I think it's over the last year, 18 months. And you look at the net migration trends that are here. And so, Florida's always been, diverse. It's always been multicultural. But for me, it's we are a country within a country in a lot of ways. And so when we tell the story of Florida and we tell the story of the uniquenesses of Florida to these global companies, it's fascinating because when they come here, they know they can have the talent, they can have, some history, they can have, there's a lot of, different nationalities that call, Florida home. But when I'm traveling the world and, working on transactions and so forth, they're all wanting to know what's really happening here. Everyone wants to figure out ways to invest here. And you're seeing a lot of that, especially in South Florida and in Palm Beach, less so in Tampa. But I think that's starting to shift as a lot of that product in South Florida is getting priced out, but a lot of, appropriate and meaningful, foreign investment is going to continue. And to be in a position where, I can meet them halfway to help them, articulate how to be successful here, how to, get the most, the highest return for their level of investment is really, really exciting. But look, Florida is humming, in and of itself. And, I think we've got great leadership in Tallahassee. We've got a lot of, alignment around what are those next, clusters that are going to help transform our economy for the next, 20 years. I think life sciences is our next North Star in Tampa. And so when you're talking, especially with companies in Boston that are up against major regulatory hurdles and they want to be here, but we have a lack of wet lab space and we have a lack of research space. Yet, we've got Amgen here, we got Johnson & Johnson, Bristol Myers, Lonza, a lot of with the exception of Lonza, most of them are, business services, support services and so forth. We want that talent here, but we want their researchers here. We want their innovation here. And I know that there's a lot of emphasis around what TGH is doing with their medical district here, what Spiros and Moffitt's doing in Pasco to really attract, cutting, leading edge, research, which will then allow us to transform our economy. But for us to be able to tell that story globally has been really fascinating, and it's honestly really starting to resonate.
Well, and like you were saying, that tie with USF, I think, is so critical. And in your role as vice chair of the board of trustees and chair of the finance committee, you've been central in like a lot of the decisions to make USF, the expansion of things. But specifically, I just want to touch on back to football for a second, the on-campus football stadium, one of the biggest bets USF has made in a generation. Walk me through that a little bit. What does that project mean for USF and for Tampa, and what did it take to get that across the finish line?
Well, what it took to get across the finish line was the leadership of our chairman, Will Weatherford, who, when you talk about great leaders, there's no one greater than Will, who's been a personal friend of mine for over 20 years. And really just, speaking that into existence, not only was it inspiring, but it was backed up by real results. And so it doesn't happen without Will. And I'm fortunate to have been, at his side, not only bringing that to fruition, but really diving into the financial side. How do we do this in a way that smart and, our fiduciary is to the students and to, we're, our fiscal, needs are significant. But then you start thinking about like, what's the cost of not doing it? If we don't decide to do this, and we're in a window right now, Tracie, as you know, over the next 2 or 3 years of another disruption in athletics and in the U.S. And there's a lot going on around revenue sharing and paying athletes and so forth. And I think that, it literally changes every day. I think Congress has got to get more involved, and we can talk more on that. But going back to USF, it was really, really important for us to have our own home. Fortunate to have played at Raymond James. It's a great, stadium. But in order for us to be taken seriously nationally around this disrupted, period, we needed to make, again, a big bet on ourselves. And so this stadium, which is on budget and on time, our first game will be against Louisville in 2027. Very, very excited about that. But this is going to be a world-class facility. Not only does it have a stadium, but it's got a football-only operations center of about 180,000 square feet. Our student athletes are going to have a world-class facility, a world-class stadium, but it's going to be a way to bring the entire community together. A lot of folks don't find their way to USF campus, maybe for a basketball game, but this is going to allow that to occur in overdrive. But for us, it was just time. And when you look back to previous leaders at USF, they all said we wanted a stadium, but couldn't quite figure out how to do it. And as Will has said, we didn't really have a plan when we announced it. We just said we're going to go do it. And so sometimes speaking big things into existence is really, really important. But the good news is that it created this rallying cry around the prioritization of athletics. And so even though we're crushing it in research, we had double-digit growth in research year over year when a lot of schools, especially in the Northeast, are on the decline. We have one of the top 16 med schools in the country, public or private. Our student success metrics continue to outperform as a preeminent university, member of the AAU, which is the top research university in the country. But we had to get athletics up to the level of our student success and our research success. So yes, athletics is a top priority at USF and will be for the foreseeable future, but not at the expense of what we're doing. And you can do it all. You can do it all, and we are doing it. And so, ultimately what it comes down to is we got to win some games. And we're very excited about Coach Hartline. He was offensive coordinator at Ohio State, the top offensive coordinator in the country. He comes here because he sees what we're building. But even more importantly, Tracie, like he sees the alignment that we have between our president, our board, our CEO of athletics, Rob Higgins. Like we are all rowing together because we know how important this is. And that is not typical at universities around the country. And so, we're locked in. We're going to win a bunch of games. We're going to find ourselves in a more competitive environment over the next few years. But until then, we're going to keep winning. We're going to compete for conference championships. And look, our standard is national championships at USF. period. And I honestly believe we've got a path to compete for national championships, quicker than a lot of other programs. And I think it's because of that alignment, but also, our true investments that we're making. And it's a $400 million capital investment. And we don't take that lightly, but it's time had come
No,
to act.
absolutely. And you've got to believe that as a football team wins and people are in the stadium, that donations go up across the university from alums, and that's just always been a proven thing that happens, which will be fun to watch. So you've been on more boards and chaired more committees and held more civic titles than almost anyone in this market. So at what point does that become more about like legacy versus leverage? And because it's a relationship business, do the two things look identical from the outside? How does that work together?
When you and I were involved with Emerge and, being involved with the chamber and becoming, they told me I was the youngest chairman in the history, or the 140-year history of the chamber. Not to get morbid or too personal, but I just felt like, look, our time on this planet, our earthly bodies are finite, right? But there was something that kind of was pulling at me that I felt like my time was shorter. Like I did not think I was gonna, and it's just, I didn't think I was gonna make it to today. I just, for some reason, for a long time, I felt like my time was shorter than what it has become. And so I just had this unhinged drive to do everything I possibly could in the period of time that I had it. And I'm thankful that I'm here. But like for me, it was just being very intentional and like living every day like it was your last. And, eventually it will be. And so ultimately it was wanting to make an impact, but it was also acknowledging that there was a lot of these, what I call leadership batons on the ground that people weren't picking up. And I just started picking them up. And I was like, look, like if you're not going to solve it, then I'm going to try to solve it. And I'm going to try to solve it with other people. But like, I'm just not going to ask permission, You and I were talking about this a little before we went live, but like, I'm not like, I'm not a generational family from Tampa. But what I learned very early on is, no matter how long you've been here, if you're engaged, if you care, if you're ethical, and if you follow through, there's nothing you can't do. And it's a very welcoming community, even from individuals that have had a presence here for generations. And so I saw that early on, and I just said, look, like I'm just gonna run as hard as I can. Now I'm very much in the today, like I'm focused on today versus tomorrow. I'm very content on like the roles that I have and the need to really be intentional around really being successful and doing the best I can with what I have in front of me, and then see what the future holds. But I've never been happier. I've never been, I would say more fulfilled civically, professionally, personally, my faith. And so I think it's just enjoying the ride and honestly just trying to mentor and bring folks along that that eventually need to do more of the heavy lifting.
So on that note, I feel like we've known each other long enough that I could ask this. What has like taking on this responsibility in Tampa like cost you personally? I don't mean financially, but like because building a city level reputation requires an enormous amount of time and presence and energy. What has that investment asked of you that people don't see?
I think one of the friendships have probably, I wish I was a more present friend to a lot of people. Not just, I've got two friends of mine that I've been close with since third grade. And, in fact, one of them yesterday, I was like, look, I've got an hour. What are you doing? And we got together for an hour, and hadn't done that in months. But for me, it's, I'd say the sacrifice is not being a better friend to people or being as accessible as I used to be. I'm very present with my wife, Melanie. We have a second grader, Maverick, and we just welcomed a 1-month-old Mason.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So being very present at home is really, really important to me right now. But I wish health wise, I'm relatively healthy, but I wish I had, more time for gym and better habits around that. I'm doing the best I can, but you're playing catch up when you're, 45, 46. It's not like it was when you were 25, 26. But look, it's just being grateful for thinking about what I have. I don't think a lot about what I don't have, but I acknowledge, some of the downsides of being super involved and super engaged. But I think my true friends understand it.
Sure,
And,
of course.
like anything, you pick up where you leave off. And that's probably the biggest, I would say personal, like real talk. But ultimately, there's going to come a time where there's going to be more time for that,
Sure,
but
of course.
just not right now.
You're co-head of the Florida region of Savills, right? I'm saying
Yeah,
that right.
perfect.
And vice chair of the USF board and one of the most connected people in the market at the same time. How do you think about the intersection of those roles? Does leading at USF make you a better business leader and vice versa?
So I'm very grateful for Savills to invest in me. Our culture is incredible. I mean, we have 42,000 employees. We have, only 1,000 of them are in North America. We're U.S. headquarters is in New York, and our global headquarters is in London. The fact that I've got close relationships with our global CEO, our North American CEO and president, isn't normal, for a lot of organizations similar to ours. And so, I'm just grateful for their support and their encouragement, candidly, to do the things that I do.
That's awesome.
But make no mistake, there's value to that engagement. I look around our competitors here in this market, and we get along. We compete, but we get along. And the majority, not all, but the majority of the leaders of kind of the roles that I'm in with our competitors have servants' hearts. They're involved with the community. They're involved with their kids' schools. They're involved with Little League. And so for me, I kind of want to inspire my industry to be more engaged by just being engaged. Like I don't pressure them. I don't try to, guilt them, Catholic guilt, I say that for other things. But like, I think there's a responsibility that much is given, much is expected. And so, but make no mistake, like my community engagement, allows me to position myself professionally in a different light. I couldn't tell you there's a direct connection between growing my business and, the civic work, but it goes back to building trust. And I think that people see me in a different context of trust building. They know that they can trust my team and I and our operations here to help them with major business decisions. So it's who I've been. I mean, since middle school, I don't know any other way of living. I don't know if you have the means to be involved and you don't. I think that's the biggest travesty. There's a lot of folks out there that can't afford time or resources to give back. But the folks that have a lot of gifts, that have a lot of opportunity, that aren't engaged in something, I'd say like is something that I have a hard time grasping. So for me, maybe it's a little more than most or some, but I think I've inspired others along the way to see more opportunities to give back. And whether it's through, USF, Junior Achievement, Boy Scouts, American Heart Association, Lions World Vision, there's just a lot of examples where, there's public and private ways to really make an impact. And I'm just really involved. I'm really keen on trying to inspire others to do that with me.
That's incredible. And I think realistically, like the people who are the busiest are sometimes the people who you give other things to do because they find the time. And absolutely, there's really no excuse to not get involved in the thing that
That's right.
inspires you, individually.
That's right.
So on that note, Emerge Tampa was created to keep people like us from leaving. And you were, as we mentioned before, the co-chair of the first group of Emerge, which is just so fun thinking back how long ago that was and how it feels like yesterday also at the same time. But you didn't just stay. You became the proof of the concept. So what's your message to the next generation of young Tampa Bay professionals who are looking at other cities or wondering if this place is worth the bet?
When you and I started Emerge, affordability was very different. Tampa was much more affordable than it is today. And I think, when you look at our incredible trajectory and success, everything we've talked about, the net migration, keeping talent here, new development, affordability is issue number one. And so I think that the message is around don't give up on Tampa, yet in terms of that. I think that there's real efforts being made to make this community more affordable. not just from the city's perspective, but, our state leadership as well. I hope that we continue to be a place where young professionals can afford to live here and really be engaged. And so I think that's probably the number one thing we've got to continue to address is the affordability challenges in our region. Outside of that is that it's still this community that it was when you and I were here early on getting involved, that the core of this city is really special. We're very welcoming. We want different ideas. We believe in civil discourse. We want your voices heard. I may disagree with you, but, this is a community that I believe is very unique, that we can engage and disagree, but do it respectfully. This is also a community that's got more opportunities to start a business, to grow a business, to sell that business, whether that's a retail or professional services or real estate, whatever it is, that there's more investment in capital here. The startup community is real. The venture capital community and private equity community is here. I could count on one or two fingers. Now it's multiple hands of that level of investment and engagement that's here. And why not have that front row seat? And again, there is not a community in this country that is going to put their arms around a young person like we will here to say, you're invited. You've got a seat at the table. Let's roll. And I think that is something that you and I and others have spent a lot of time cultivating, that they're not going to get anywhere else. Now, if you want to go live in New York, or you want to live, in London, or you want to live in Atlanta, a big city, a quote unquote big city, and come back, fine. But you're not going to have it better than what we have it here. And so I think that, we've got to continue to find ways to create meaningful jobs here that allows people to grow and stay here. We've come a long way, but we're not quite there yet. And I mentioned life sciences and some of these more emerging technologies and innovations. We need jobs that are, thinking ahead of AI, that are thinking ahead of, candidly things that are, positions that are replaceable around real cutting edge technology. And so that's going to be around USF, TGH, Moffitt, and like all of the, kind of the tentacles that come from that level of research is going to create not only more high paying jobs, but it's going to create opportunities for people to grow in a path that's even more robust than we've seen in the last 20 years.
You've been, like, as we've said, you've been investing in the city since before people knew it was worth investing in. And then when you look at Tampa Bay today versus the Tampa you kind of showed up in after, graduating from USF, what makes you the proudest of like where we've come from?
We haven't forgotten like who we are. Even though we've had a lot of new folks move here and call Tampa home, we haven't lost what made this city special, which is a lot of what around. I love Ybor City. I love what Daryl Shaw is doing there, and really embracing development that is highlighting the history of Ybor. I'm very optimistic that Ybor's best days are ahead of us. You look at the investments that are being made in our neighborhoods. I'm very proud of the work that, the last few mayors have done in downtown, the completion of our Riverwalk. You look at, Gasparilla Music Festival, Gasparilla itself, our arts festivals, our certainly our sports teams, but, you look at our museums, the Glazer Children's Museum, our Contemporary and Fine Arts Museum, the Straz, all of these great anchors have only gotten better. And I think that, those investments that have been made are people that are just really aware of what got us here is not going to get us there. And so I think we've got to continue pushing the envelope. And so I'm just proud of, like, in spite of all the growth we've had and all the great development we've had, we haven't lost who we are and what's made us great.
That's just like, what a perfect wrap up for that. So just the final thing we always do with every guest is what we call the lightning round. We ask
Cool.
everyone the same 3 questions. So first is, what would you say your hype song is? Or if you were a baseball player, your walk-up song, what's your...
Right above it, Lil Wayne.
Perfect. I love it. I love how everyone's like, no one could ever see it coming.
Now the lyrics, don't take every lyric in that, but anyways.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. What is your current favorite Tampa Bay restaurant?
Roca.
Good choice. Have you had the mozzarella, the table side
Well,
mozzarella?
table side mozzarella, and they have this off menu Wagyu bone-in steak that's to die for.
Good secret. I did not
Yeah,
know that.
it's they bring it out to you, and I'm a big fan of our restaurant scene, as you can tell.
And then finally, what is the best business gift you ever received?
Best business gift was from Ann Duncan, my mentor. When I started, it was called The Trusted Advisor. It's a book that I give every young person. It's required reading, but again, it goes back to what we were talking about building trust. But I think it was the book. Outside of that, I had a friend of mine buy me a pen, writing pen, a very nice pen, and I, felt like it was a utility. Oh, but like having a nice pen in a business setting, I think is can set you apart. But I'd say definitely the book Trusted Advisors was the best gift.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Mike, this was really wonderful and so great to talk with you. Thank you so much for being
Thanks
here.
for having me, Tracy. Appreciate it.
Thank you. What I loved about this conversation is it really wasn't a story about real estate. It was a story about belief. Belief in a city, belief in its people, and belief in what's possible when someone decides to bet on a place before the rest of the world catches up. We made that bet together more than 20 years ago, and I'm glad we both stayed. If you're interested in working with someone with that kind of market depth, find Mike at savills.us. And if you're a USF bull or you just believe in what USF is building, pay attention to what's happening on their campus. Big things are coming. And if today's conversation reminded you that the best time to invest in something, a city, a relationship, a career, is always before everyone else figures it out, share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. I'm Tracie Domino, and this is The Bay Builds. We'll see you next time.